Hello friends, I am Rishayan. I'm going to answer today a question that was asked to me by one of the people that watch my channel. They asked, how do I go back and forth to Mexico, and do I camp along the way? Those that have been watching my videos that know me know that I camp in the United States because I can't afford to pay rent or hotels, which are all absurdly expensive. So when I'm in the US, I often camp, except for the times that I'm staying with relatives or with friends. And in Mexico, I have a house, a concrete bunker, but it's a house that I live in. And so I travel quite a bit back and forth from Mexico to the US. I've been doing this like for the last, wow, 40 years back and forth, 45 years back and forth from Mexico to the US, and several years, especially during my highest fame with YouTube, which was from about 2015 to 2018, 2019. I was going like 5-6 times a year back and forth. So how do I go? Well, for the first many years that I went by bus, which was the most economic way to go. Horrible. If anybody has been recently, or even not recently, ever been on a Greyhound bus, can know how horrible it is. I have not been on a Greyhound bus recently, but I read, or I see on YouTube people that had traveled by bus, and only the comments that just make it scary. You know, it's just, I think it's probably worse than it ever was before. It was horrible 30-40 years ago. Greyhound was a horrible way to go. But economically, in those years, it was best. I remember they had fares of like $99 across country, you know, $100, $150 to go from here to I'm in the northeast U.S. to Brownsville, Texas, and then cross over in Brownsville, and then I took a bus on the Mexican side, which was a million times better, and it still is on the Mexican side. They have first-class buses there that are just, they're not overpacked. The people that sell you the tickets are friendly, and you know, and on and on. But that's how I went for many years. But today, air travel, in many, especially if you're going long distance air travel, is cheaper. It is cheaper than going through the hell of being on a bus or a train. Trains have become horribly expensive and take a lot longer. I would prefer a train, actually, but they're just way too expensive. And a bus is much more expensive than it was. I think today it's running just about what it costs in a plane, around 300 bucks to take a Greyhound bus. But this is like 3 days to go from here to the border. And so, you know, I fly, and I've been flying probably for the last, let's say the last 20 years. Of all the years that I've gone back and forth to Mexico, I'd say approximately the last 20 years I've been flying. Southwest Airlines used to fly cheap from Baltimore to Mexico City. They had very decent rates. Sometimes I got them as low as like 150 bucks because they had bought out another airline. I don't remember what that airline was called, that had Mexico City routes. Well, all they did is run it into the ground, really. They just had those routes for a few years, and then, you know, they figured that they weren't making enough profit, so they stopped it. Well, you know, it's a profitable route. I mean, you can take Delta or United, are the two principal carriers from the U.S. to Mexico City, and they're full. The flights are full. So Southwest, obviously, you know, is a business decision. It was terrible that they stop those flights, but they still fly, I understand, to Cancun and to Puerto Vallarta. But they're way out of the way for me and would be just too much hassle. So it's Delta that is the primary carrier to Mexico City. And their rates are reasonable if you buy ahead of time. And I mean months ahead of time, which is what I have to do. I mean, don't even think of it if you're going to buy a couple days ahead of time. They can be $1,000, $1,500 or more. If you're going to buy at the last minute, depending on how full the planes are. But if you buy, as I do, 3-4 months in advance, and you don't lose that money. I mean, if they don't if you change your mind or whatever, you can change the flight, or they'll just keep it for you for the next time that you fly, and you can use that as a credit. But and I think they just made a new law in the U.S. that's supposed to go into effect in October. I seen on the on YouTube the other day that they're now going to be required to refund you that money, so that's okay. But it's running around $350 to $400 approximately one way to Mexico City. Well, you know, why should I pay $300 on a bus and suffer? You know, the buses are late, you miss connections, they're rude, horrible, uncomfortable, and just for an old man like me. Oh my God, I don't know. I was in pain when I was younger and took the bus cross country. Today, I don't know if I could survive it. You know, I might as well just pay 50, 60, 70 bucks more and fly. So flying is the principal way I go. Although, because flying has become horrible, nothing less than horrible. I used to fly, I lived in Texas a long time ago. I worked for Southwestern Bell Telephone in Dallas. And I would fly around the state of Texas, go down to South Padre Island or go to Houston or somewhere on the famous Southwest Airlines. It was very cheap, very nice, very comfortable, no TSA. You could buy your ticket at the last moment, and it was great. Air travel years ago was wonderful. Today it's a horror. It's just, you know, it's just a horror. I never look forward to it. It's just terrible and getting worse. You know, the last time that I think it was maybe the second to the last time that I flew out, they wanted to take the money out of my wallet. Yeah, the TSA. They don't want you to fly with any money. They threatened to take the money out of my wallet. It wasn't any quantity of money. There's no limit on money, but they're criminals. Criminales, you know, they're criminals. I never had that happen in Mexico, but it happened. So it's just very unpleasant, but you can only do what you can do. You know, I mean, if I took the bus from here to, or the train goes to, the closest it goes to Mexico is Del Rio, Texas, and it's just a headache changing and whatever. But days and days, it's like 2 to 3 days on the American side, and then on the Mexican side, it's another day and a half to get to where I go in southern Mexico. So I fly. Now on the Mexican side, I only fly as far as Mexico City. I have taken a national plane to the coast, but the area that I live in, there is no airport within, well, let's say 150 miles. It's about 150 miles on either side of an airport. And one of those places is Acapulco, which is a very dangerous city. It's not at all safe, completely and totally run by organized crime. And I get nervous every time I go through that city. I have to sometimes to change, but it's just it's not a pleasant thing. So yeah, I fly and then I take a bus or local transportation on the Mexican side. When I in 2020, I think I had maybe COVID. It was never proven that I had COVID, but I was sick just like everybody else and had similar symptoms to everybody else. And so I decided to come back, and I couldn't even take the local transit. You know, I had to pay. It was expensive. I think it ended up being like $300-400, which is cheap for the U.S. But I paid a local taxi, a private taxi to go all the way from the coast to Mexico City. Can you believe that? It wasn't all in one taxi. I had to change, you know, because the taxi driver would only go so far out of his zone. But private taxi all the way from the coast to Mexico City. And like I said, I don't believe it topped over $300-400 to do that, which is expensive in Mexico. But just ask how much a special taxi would cost in the U.S. to go that kind of distance. You know, we're looking like, what, like 700-800 miles? You know, wow. What was the other question? Do I camp along the way? Hopefully I have enough time in this video to make it too long, because I'll talk about experiences that I had that I don't think I've ever told about in English. Almost everything I'm saying has already been published in Spanish, but now I'm doing it in English for the people of the English language that are following me. Yes, when I fly now, not really. I go direct, because you know, if I leave like my mom's house, if I leave in the morning, I'm in Mexico by the afternoon, and to go to where I live on the coast is the next day in the morning, but using all-night transit where I can sort of sleep on the bus and so on. So that's approximately how long it takes. So I don't really camp. And then I have to go through, if I go through the state of Guerrero, which is one of the most dangerous places on earth, probably equal to Afghanistan, you know. It's not an option to even think about camping anywhere in that state, except the area that I live in, which is also in the state of Guerrero, but it's sort of like in a, I don't really want to say peaceful, but sort of peaceful corner of the state where I sort of know my ropes there. But so it's not really an option in that routing when I go by plane. Now, when I used to take the bus, I did very much. It was just a long trip, and I was an old man then. I'm an even older man now, you know, and it was just a long trip. So I would camp like halfway onto the U.S., onto Brownsville, Texas, usually in the state of San Luis Potosí. And I had found some places in the desert. Those that know the state of San Luis Potosí know that it's sort of semi-arid desert, a good part of the state, except for the Huasteca, but the central part of the state is mostly desert, and which is cool for camping, really cool. And I had found a place outside of the city of San Luis Potosí, which is a city of about 1 million people, but in sort of like, they don't really call them suburbs, but sort of like in the outskirts of the city, in a rural little community along the federal highway. I found a little patch of desert that was communal land, or hedal land as they call it, that I had been camped. I started to use the camp halfway. I'd take the bus to there, camp, spend the night, and then the next day continue my journey to the border. Well, one year, and I don't remember exactly what year it was, but somebody had to have seen me at night. I didn't see them, but they seen me. And this is, of course, the narco wars in Mexico now have been going on since about like the late 2000s, like 2005, 2006, when the violence started to increase dramatically. And so this was during that time, and people became very desconfiado, they say in Spanish. How would you say that in English? Uncomfortable, or I don't know what you say in English, but they didn't lack confidence in anything. You know, they were scared of everything, and which is a little over exaggeration, because it's not really that bad. But you know, people watch too much internet, too much TV, and they only see the bad things, and that scares them, and so whatever. So somebody had seen me in this little piece of desert where I had been had camped the night, and it must have been late in the day, and it probably was. It's very common. This was a very small rural community that was near there, and it's very common that people, how can I say this politely, go to the bathroom in the bush, you know, the campesinos, you know, the people that work in the fields, and there was some agricultural fields nearby, and you know, and because otherwise nobody would actually go into this little patch of desert. There was nothing growing there. It was just mesquite trees and nopales, you know, cactus and whatever. But somebody must have seen me late in the day, and they probably was because they had gone into that area to use the bathroom. And instead of, you know, there's no more machismo in most of Mexico. You know, they get scared. They notified the comisario. Well, in Guerrero we call them comisario. In the state of San Luis Potosí, I think they call them delegado, or delegate, but it's the same thing. They're sort of the head of the village, and they notified him, and he also, being cowardly, instead of coming to check out the situation himself, notifies the state police, you know. So it's about midnight, and I was asleep, totally asleep in my tent, when I started hearing the sounds of like police radio, like, you know, and I thought, am I dreaming or what, you know, in the desert? And I'm hearing this police radio. Well, finally the noise got louder, and I you know, just opened my eyes, and I seen these lights on the top of my tent. And I thought, uh-oh, somebody's looking for me. You know, I knew right away. So I quickly took down the tent and got out and just sat there for a second, hoping that maybe they wouldn't find me. But they did, with these bright lights, and then they shine, and they say, ahí está, cabrón. You know, there he is. And then they start screaming at me, you know, get out, stand up, get out, you know, of the tent, and stand up. And I said, well, let me put on my pants. And they said, yeah, put it there, you know, right now. I mean, they want me to put on the pants, and I could hear the clicking of the machine gun, click, 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 click. I thought, holy hell, these guys are going to shoot me, you know. And they said they were police, and they were state police. So 3 of them come through, and then right away, the head guy, who is a crook and criminal, there's no doubt. Most Mexican police have criminal ties with organized crime. And, I mean, you could just look at the scar on his face, and that's all you need to know. He was very brutal in the form that he talked, and he was even more pissed off because, you know, in the desert, there's a lot of thorny bushes, you know, and so he had cut himself going through the thorny bush. You know, I didn't tell him to come there. It's his fault. At night, at midnight, you know, and you can't see clearly. And so he was pissed from the beginning that he had gotten cut by the thorny bush. And he starts screaming at me to take everything out of my pockets and whatever. And I'm, of course, and it's cold, you know, in the desert. I don't even remember what month it was, but it was sort of cold. And I'm sitting there sort of shivering and standing in just my shorts. And he's telling me to take everything out of my pockets, and starts ripping apart the tent and throwing everything out to see it. And he shouts to me, they're typical thing, you know, where's the guns, where's the drugs, where's the guns and drugs? I said, I don't have no drugs, I don't have no guns, you know. And they're just looking for a pretext to steal from you, really. And he doesn't find nothing, but he's sort of brutal. There were 3 of them. One was the idiot campesino, and I can't say it any other way, because he was the delegado, or the delegate, that he should have checked himself. He shouldn't have had to call the police. He could have resolved the situation himself, you know. But cowardly, he calls the state police. And then there was another policeman. Now the other policeman was cool. You know, in Mexico you have the good cop, bad cop thing. Ones are, you know, involved with organized crime, and the other ones are maybe not, you know. And he was just sort of observing the situation, and he even asked me, he says, you know, are you cold or something? I said, yeah, and it's sort of cold. I mean, he seemed to have more sympathy, and he never yelled at me, he never said nothing, he seemed to be cool. And and to show you that they're not the brightest, you know, they're not the brightest. They don't know modern things. I had 2 radios, because those that know me know that I like radios for my entertainment when I'm out camping or whatever. One radio was a scanner, which is illegal, basically, in Mexico. But many law enforcement don't know what it is or realize that. And the other one was just a regular AM/FM radio. But the AM/FM radio was in the form, you know, it looked like a 2-way radio. I mean, it was in that style. He sees the scanner, which did not have an antenna or anything. It was just sitting there. I don't know what he thought. He just looked at it and threw it back down. That it could have got me in trouble, right? And then a little while later, he finds the AM/FM radio. He picks that up. He yells at me. He says, "What's this?" I said, "It's a radio," you know. So I turned it on, you know, for him, and music came out, thank God. And then he was satisfied, and he threw it back down. So, idiots. I mean, he could have screwed me with the scanner. But he didn't say nothing about that. He didn't know what it was. But that was a regular AM/FM radio. That he was going to make a big deal about. So, so then he says, well, you can't stay here. It's illegal to stay here, which is sort of a lie. You know, it was public ejido land. I mean, you sort of need the permission of the ejido, but they never, ever, in Mexico, they will never put you in jail for being poor. They will never put you in jail for sleeping alongside the road or in the bush. Never. They might extort money out of you like they did, you know, but they're not going to put you in jail. So, so then he says, you know, you have to leave. You know, we'll take you to a hotel, he says. I said, I ain't got money for a hotel. They knew how much money I had anyways, because they emptied my pockets. They could see the cash that I was carrying. But I said, no, I can't afford to pay a hotel. I'm just in transit. You know, I said, I'm just here today and gone tomorrow. And so he says, well, he says, you know, you're going to have to leave. I said, hey, that's dangerous. It's midnight. Do you want me to walk along the highway? Oh, they said to me, one of the reasons they said that it wasn't good that I was there is because they said there had been dead bodies that the narcos had tossed out recently. Before that, had tossed out some dead bodies in that area, and that's why the people were nervous and everything. And that could have been true. It is common, but I said, you know, well, the dead bodies don't mean nothing to me. It ain't gonna hurt me, you know. I mean, I didn't see no dead bodies, but whatever. And he said, so he said, well, you can't stay here. I said, well, you know, I mean, it's not safe to walk along the highway at night. I mean, if that's what you want me to do, you know. I said, can't you please just let me stay until morning? So the cop says, he says, well, it's up to this delegado, you know, this idiot. I'm sorry, I can't think of anything else to call him. You know, if he lets you, you know, he's the one in charge of the village. And so he starts saying some BS about, oh, maybe a snake will bite you, something. I said, you know, just until morning, sir. I said, come on, have a heart, you know. So finally they agree. And they said, okay, you know, but in the morning you got to go. Okay, no problem. Then he says, he says, well, but we're going to have to charge you for the gasoline. I said, the gasoline? He said, yeah, for the gasoline to come, because they had to come all the way from the city of San Luis Potosí. They don't have patrols at night in Mexico because the narcos run, you know, they control the roads so that there isn't any conflict between the police and the narcos. They don't patrol the roads at night. They stay in the cities, you know. And it was about maybe 15 or 20 miles away, the city. And so he says, you know, yeah, you got to pay for the gasoline for the patrol vehicle to come all the way out here to find you, you know. So at that time, I think it was 50 pesos, which today they would not accept that. They'd slap you in the face for an insult because it's nothing. But at that time, 50 pesos was more valuable, had more value. I don't know exactly how much, maybe $15, $20, something like that. And so I gave 50 pesos to the cop, the crooked cop. I gave 50 pesos to the idiot delegado. And I offered the 50 pesos to the good cop, and he wouldn't take it. So that's how I knew he was a good cop. No, he just shook his head. No, he would not take the bribe, you know, or the money, whatever you want to call it, the gasoline charge. But the other two, they took it. And then they said, all right, and they left. You know, and but I was too nervous to sleep. I couldn't go back to sleep. I moved to a different part of the desert and stayed there in case they'd come back later, but because now everybody knew that I was there. And but I just couldn't sleep. The next day, I got on a bus, went to another place that I knew of further in the interior, you might say, of the state of San Luis Potosí. They're out further in the countryside. And right away checked with the local people. It was surrounded by desert, a lot of good areas to camp. And I asked the local people if it would be a problem, and they all said, no, everything's tranquilo, you know, everything's tranquil here, no problem. And which I did. I stayed several days there, and it was pretty nice. But so, yeah, there have been times that I've camped. So I hope that answers your problems. Hopefully this is still recording, because I hate this camera. It just stop on its own. But anyways, so I hope that answers your questions about my adventures in Mexico. And have a nice day. I love all of you. I am Rishayan. Goodbye.